Well, hello. Welcome to another conversation. We are so excited that you decided to join us. You could be any place in the world, and you're hanging out with Laura Lee and myself. And so, but before we get started, I do want to do a simple land acknowledgement. And we know that we're in cyberspace, right? So there's not necessarily any land in this space. But had it not been for those indigenous folks wherever we are that kept the land, that worked the land, that honored the land, we wouldn't have the opportunity to be here. So I'll just go through a piece of our land acknowledgement. So we wish to recognize and honor the ancestral territories of the lands that we're currently in, and those people who have been stewards of the land throughout generations, living nurturing the living ecosystems and fostering vibrant culture heritage that we're able to use today. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and future, who hold the memories, traditions, and wisdom, and who sustain and guide their communities. We remember the struggles that they've endured and recognize their resilience in the face of adversity. By acknowledging the rich cultural tapestry of these groups, we celebrate an invaluable contribution to our shared society, and we embrace the diversity that strengthens and enriches our collective identity. So we want to say thank you to all those ancestors. We want to say thank you to those here in the present and those who carry this into the future. Because if it were not for that character, for that development, for taking care of our ecosystems, we wouldn't be able to have what we have today. So thank you. Laura?
And that's so important, especially in this space of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Andre, you and I have talked multiple times about the fact that, and the last time you had mentioned this, not missing your handoff, right? And the fact that what we've been able to achieve to this point in our own careers, we recognize and acknowledge that it was built on those successes of people who came before us, right?
Yeah,
And so that's what I love about the that piece that you just read is it
yeah,
honors both people past, present, and future.
yeah. And Laura, as I look at the stream, I think we're still on the screen, on the timer screen. So I'm hoping that folks are able to hear us and listen in on what we
Interesting,
have
because on the
to provide.
YouTube, it looks like YouTube Studio side, it looks like it's good.
All right. Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit behind. I'm a little bit behind. So no, that I think that land acknowledgement piece is extremely important because it centers us, right? So one of the things, and we'll talk about this too, is that if you don't know where you are, if you don't understand the context, then the behavior seems strange to you,
Yeah.
right? And so when you know where you are, when you understand the context, then you can understand people's behaviors. So back to you, Laura.
And today, I think that's an important piece because last last session, or the first session, the first few sessions, we were talking about this idea of when the DEIB practitioner walks alone or feels like we're walking alone, and how do we, what are the tools or resources that we lean on? How do we keep the fire burning instead of burning out? Right? And so in this session, I figured we can talk a little bit, let's spend some time talking about how do we prevent stress, manage expectations, and prevent burnout. Both of you and I have been doing this for 20 plus years, right? And I think there's some of the tricks and tips that we probably have picked along the way that younger, newer practitioners can certainly lean on. In the our DEIB Accelerated program, we talk about it's important to ground ourselves in why this work is important to us, both individually personally as an individual and in the professional space, right? So why is this work important to you, and what's your purpose in doing this work? So those are some important pieces. You come back to understanding why you do that, and when you are faced with challenges, that's going to be your guiding star. That's your North Star, right? And oftentimes, people who stepped into this space are doing it because of a passion, because of love, but what is your true purpose in doing this work? And so taking some time to identify that, and we help you do that in the DIB practitioner program, or accelerated program. But even as you listen to us talk today, even thinking about what is that for me, and thinking about what is your purpose, and then
And
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I mean, because that the accelerator program isn't so much about how you accelerate the work, but
Yeah.
is how do you accelerate you? Because
Hmm.
without you in the organization, without having a sound mind in a strong foundation, um, once we leave a position, the work can just float away,
Yeah.
right? And so how do we how do we accelerate ourselves in that? And so I really appreciate. I can't wait to start engaging in folks in that program as we roll that out. So back to you,
Yeah,
Dave.
and part of that program we talk about, just in quickly, but and then we can dive in deeper into each of these and other topics. Um, Tips for success as we think about this work, right? Don't do this work alone. And I know that you and I talked a little bit about this last session about not doing this work alone, because the way you and I met was because we were trying to find people who were doing this work together, right? And try to lean on and learn from one another. In that diversity circle roundtable thing, that whatever I can't even remember what it's called. I think it's still running. That we met in, it was like-minded people who were either doing the work already, or were interested in learning more about the work, or who was early stepping into the work and trying to find people to support one another, right? And I know that for me, that circle was a huge plus, because I can bounce ideas off of people. I can listen to what others are struggling through and say, "Oh, I've seen that. I've done that. I've struggled through that." And offer my own advice to them as I've gone through that own challenge that they are going through right now, right? And so don't do this work alone, because I've seen so many people who, have great intentions and want to do the right thing, but they feel like they're on an island, and they feel like they can't move anything forward, because when they look around, right? Especially when you're the sole practitioner, when you look around, it's like, ooh, a little bit cold and lonely out here, you know? So for
Yeah, I
me,
mean,
that's a big piece. Don't do this work alone.
yeah, and I don't want to say that oftentimes I don't want to say that organizations have nefarious
Yeah.
um, approaches to this, but I will say that when things are really difficult, if we can set them up so that they're oh, I know what it is. So if we can have deniability, right? If we can say we really didn't want to do this, but they're the reason that we really shouldn't do it, right? And sometimes that isolation allows folks to start to create these narratives because they're not really things that they really wanted to do, and now they're looking for an excuse not to do it, right? And
Yeah.
so, partnering with senior leaders, working to leverage other people's influence and other people's power, um, puts you in a position that it's just not you alone, right? So and this is the interesting thing about many of the challenges that we face. Oftentimes they are obstacle illusions, right? Artificial barriers that are illusions that we can pierce through collaborative processes, right? So they're mind games or mind tricks that either people are playing on us or we're playing on
Yeah.
ourselves, but we can get over those obstacle illusions to actually be effective once we're able to build those coalitions, right? And you know, one of the things that I think along with that, not doing it by yourself, is you don't have to be the martyr. Don't be a martyr.
Hmm. Hmm.
Don't put yourself in a position where you're like, I'm the only one that can do this, or
Yeah.
I'm and there may be truth to that, but there are things that I can do, and then there are things that I should do.
Yes. Yeah.
And so really knowing the difference, because that martyrdom, I think, being the only person, feeling like I have to da 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 da, that starts to build this stress, and I think that's where the wick of burnout is lit, under those types of conditions.
Can you think of your own personal example of when you've gone through that, right? When you've felt like, oh man, am I truly alone in this work, right? Or you feel like you're alone, or you feel like you are the only person that can do this work in this big institution that you're sitting in. And how did you pull yourself out of that?
Yeah, I think for most practitioners, if you feel that, acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Because it's real. A lot of times people want to talk about emotions as if they are a bad thing,
Uh-huh.
right? Like, we need to have more information and less about your feelings. No, your feelings are information.
Yeah.
It is data, right? And so lean into that and figure that, because these are the signs that either your subconscious or even your conscious is saying, pay attention to this. This is something that's important.
Hmm.
And I think anytime I felt like that, it was because it in some way it was true.
Hmm.
And so when you start to feel that way, or you even see it in the organization, you acknowledge it first and foremost. I am alone in this, as a department or as an incumbent in this role,
Hmm.
and then start to ask yourself, can you function well in that environment, being the only? And more often than not, the answer is probably no. So I think starting to build coalitions for the organization, but I think as an individual, you also have to start building relationships and communities around yourself,
Hmm.
right? So hairdressers need hairdressers, lawyers need lawyers, doctors need doctors, diversity professionals need other diversity
Correct.
professionals,
Correct.
right? And so and so there's that. So you start to look for other pieces, and I reflected a little bit on kind of some of our conversations, Laura, is also when I'm starting to feel that, and I'm starting to do that, to recognize that I do need these other people to support me,
Yeah.
but I also need to turn it off. i need
What do you
i
mean by
need
turn it
people in my
off?
life. What's that?
What do you mean by turn it off?
Well, if if any of our callers, our listeners, or the folks that are tuned in, or anything like me, I see diversity challenges everywhere I go. I see I see opportunities to teach. I see opportunities to address. I see and in some cases, my partner says, turn it off.
Yeah.
She's a wonderful partner. She's like, Andre, you got to turn it off right
Yeah.
now.
I remember, so as you're talking, I was thinking about Early on in my career, I was working in K 12, and it's a smaller district. I think we had K through 12, 150, maybe 200 staff tops, right? But I was the only person, quote unquote, designated to do any of the diversity, multicultural education work, whatever it was called back then. Because and that's a whole other conversation we can have about the evolution of this work. Um, but I remember feeling that isolation because I was one of 200 staff members who were focused on this, and it didn't help that I think I was one of maybe 5 staff of color in the whole district, right? And so they were dispersed. We were all dispersed, and so talk about feeling isolation. Um, but I think how I kind of pulled myself out of that. You talked about collaboration. You talked about those co-collaborators that whether it's get you in trouble or keep you out of trouble. Sometimes it's both. Um, Finding that circle of other people who may not have this title, who you can lean on and can push things forward together, right? So I remember the curriculum director was a huge advocate, and she did not have the title, but through the collaboration of her work and pushing it through the curriculum side of the world, right, we were able to advance the work in other teachers or with other teachers as they were rolling out curriculum or focused on teacher education opportunities. Um, though that was one way that, to your point about finding others to support the work, for me was one of the early learnings for me to really help me keep going on that collaborative approach to the work, right?
Yeah.
And the one example that comes to mind is fifth grade. This was in Minnesota, so fifth grade. I don't know what it is anymore, but right now, or when back then, fifth grade there was a focus on Minnesota history,
Mhm.
right? And as we were having conversations about reviewing the curriculum for Minnesota history in fifth grade, I had brought into the conversation, what about a piece on the influence of black architects and builders and others with the state capitol, right? Instead of just this nice big white building that sits in St. Paul, what if the conversations was focused on, yes, that capitol was not just created out of the blue, but here's all the other people that influenced the capitol, right? And so that was a great way to collaborate with someone outside of my so-called subject and push something through around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging.
Yep. Yep. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, there are lots of folks who, are um, these single individuals in these
Yeah.
departments, and they love it because they get to set the agenda, right? So there's this one part where I'm the martyr.
Yeah.
There's one aspect where I'm the martyr, and then there's this other aspect where folks are like, I'm the
Savior.
you know I'm the savior, and I speak for all people, right? And so I think that's the other thing that is kind of a setup too. Like, and sometimes organizations do that. I know that when I have had expectations mismanaged
Hmm.
in an organization, I felt the brunt of that, right? Like, oh, we've been waiting for this diversity guy. Oh, this Andre, he's amazing. He's incredible. He's the you know,
He walks
if
on
it wasn't
water.
right, he walks on water, he slices bread, and all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's also a different type of setup that we have to kind of manage expectations and really point to. And it feels good actually at first to be told, you're the best. We've been waiting on you.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
our whole life. Where have you been our whole lives? All this stuff it initially feels good, but if we're not able to kind of back up and set the expectations around goals and look at those things, then we can set ourselves up um, for some failure and some heartbreak and some hard times because I can't always live up to what people's fantasies are in their head,
Correct.
particularly if they haven't written them down with I like using the SMART goals, right? If they haven't been measurable, if they're not timely, if they don't
Yep.
have resources, I can't reach those things, and so then it becomes all about disappointment,
Yep.
right? And so that's some important pieces to
Yep.
to to recognize.
Another piece I'd like to talk about is celebrating small wins, right? Because oftentimes in this work, you'll get some big wins along the way. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be some big wins like getting in front of the board, right, and getting board acknowledgement and quote unquote stamp of approval for your strategy to and goals to move forward. That's huge. Those are some big pieces. But for me, what I've also found to keep me going in the last 20 plus years is the ability to celebrate those small wins, whether it is small wins on the team or small wins with one individual who may not be in a position of power or influence to make any big changes, right? But that what I've done for that person is to be able to change his or her perspective on their capabilities and their competencies and their skills and even potentially for some of them their future of what they can do, whether it's inside of that organization or outside of that organization. And so for me, I'll give you an example in a little bit, but celebrating those small wins, even with the individuals, sole individuals who may be quote unquote on the fringes, who may not have any power, any influence, but I made an impact on their lives.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to and in our work we battle some of these kind of um, colloquialisms, right?
Hmm.
So people will talk about poor white people as white trash,
Hmm.
right? There are no disposable people. I
Yep.
mean, particularly in when we're in this DEI space, we have to look for those wins and get those wins wherever we can as often as we can, right? Because oftentimes it feels like it's DEI is this cup of water that is constantly being evaporated, right? So we have to keep filling that thing, or is the glass half full or half empty? It depends on how much you keep putting into the cup, right?
Yep.
And so I think those are some important things to remember too. That it's those small wins, and I would say that there are no big wins
Hmm.
without the small wins, right?
Hmm.
And if we're able to, and I'm sure you'll speak to this too, Laura, but when we're able to help other people get small wins,
Yep.
those are our big wins,
Yes.
right? So I
Yes.
spend time in training or coaching or mentoring someone, and they say, "Wow, you talked about that concept in terms of work, but you know what? I could use that in my personal life."
Yep.
That's a win.
Yep.
Score one, life changed, right?
Yep.
So yeah, so helping other people to achieve their goals and to recognize how to use the skills that of our DEIB initiatives to actually change their own lives. Those are the big wins. And so yeah, you can talk more a little bit about those small wins.
Yeah, I think one of these, I've got a couple of examples that are floating around in my head, but I think one of the examples is with one in a previous organization where they've had a number of employee resource groups, right? And these employee resource group leaders were, always told, yeah, it's cute that you lead the employee resource groups over there, but keep that over there, right? That's a cute thing you do on the side. That's a voluntary thing that you do on the side. But never saw and never made that tie to the official organizational supported programs around leadership development, right? And when we were able to make that tie for them and bring those ERG leaders into the formal leadership development circle, and at least tying them into those resources and accessing those resources, that created huge wins for even just the individuals. Right? It wasn't just a big win for the program itself, it was a big win for the individuals. And now they're seen as actual leaders and potentially pipelines into succession pools for leaders in that organization. And that's a big win. But for me, another one that comes to mind is this was, oh, geez, I want to say maybe 12 years ago. An individual in facilities management. Okay, so the people who take care of your HVACs, big building, big organization where the people who take care of your HVAC and your electricity and make sure things are working well. Individual came to me and said, "Lord, my boss, I don't know what to do. I want to grow. I don't want to be stuck in this role." And I went to my boss, and my boss said, "There's nothing for me." And I pointed this individual to the plethora of learning opportunities and pathways for this individual to grow and learn and develop out of that, right? And they were able to take advantage of those opportunities and grow themselves into a role outside of facilities management, which was at that time, you know, because they weren't when anything big HVAC that needed a licensed HVAC professional, they were called in. So this individual was really just kind of checking, maintaining, like you would in your house, changing the filter, changing light bulbs, and so it was real entry level. And so they were looking for something more, but staying into the organization. So able to help this individual just learn and grow of new pathways and new and so that's that for me. Even again, that's why I say, even if it's one individual and
Yeah.
changing the trajectory of their pathway.
Yeah. No, and I think, when you think about changing that one individual, that actually should be, the goal of most of our work,
Yeah.
right? Because, a large part of our work is helping people to alter how they think
Hmm.
and making sure that they prick their hearts, right? So, and sometimes, because the world has been so rough, it's hard to find a place that doesn't have a callus
Hmm.
to be able to make sure that our heart is pricked. But that's the other part of that. I also think, making sure that we're able to get these small wins and count them as a part of our gratitude, our mindset of gratitude,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And in a number of cases, I know that I have appeared to be wrong so that I could get the small win,
Mm.
because I'd rather be effective than right.
Tell me more.
And
Tell the audience more. You and I have had kind of numerous conversations about effective versus right, right?
yeah,
Tell the audience more about what you mean by that.
yeah.
Appearing to be wrong to
Yeah,
advance the work.
so this is I'll tell this story. So I live in the northern suburbs of the Twin Cities here in Minnesota. So just north of Minneapolis and St. Paul cities, respectively, and and so it's not a diversity mecca. It's not known for the cross cultural collaboration that one could have, but it's a safe and great community for
Yeah.
my family. But I went into to a restaurant on a Saturday to grab some lunch, and so I'm in this restaurant, and I see a guy who's red faced and very inebriated, right?
Mm.
And so I automatically recognize there's some clues here, like, this must be this guy's regular place. These people at the bar must know him for him to be this drunk at that, this time of the day. And so I'm just going to grab my lunch and I'm going to go. And so I'm standing at the bar with the menu. I close the menu and the guy has moved from the end of the bar right next to me. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my goodness.
What's going to
And
happen
so,
now, right?
right, because, inebriated folks are unpredictable. Right. And so, so I'm in this space and I'm trying to decide, what is my responsibility? What am I supposed to do while I'm
Mm,
waiting on my food? And so the guy leans over to me and he says, hey, I don't like the N word.
mm,
And so he called me the N word, that
mm.
derogatory term that sometimes you'll hear in rap lyrics. And because they're rappers, they can do it. Doesn't necessarily mean you can because you're not a rapper, so that word, right?
Context is
So
everything. We've talked about
context is
that.
everything. And so so I was like, whoa, I thought about changing the subject, but I didn't. I leaned into that word and I said, sir, when you use that word, what are you talking about? And he said, I'm talking about lazy people, people living off the system, people who can't, da 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 da. Da. So he went on this
Interesting.
whole litany, right? So I go back, so I'm like, oh, how about those Vikings, right? And so we started talking about the Vikings, and we talk about the Twins and our local sports teams here,
Hmm.
and then he leans over and he says, "You know what? I don't like the N word, but I like you." And I said, "Well, that's interesting." I said, "Well, what is so different about me that you?" What is so different? He said, "You're articulate. You have a good head on your shoulders. You have your stuff together, and you're just a likable guy." And I turned to him and I said, well, what if the people that you met that you think look like me, the ones you've met, were idiots? What if they were idiots and everybody else that you haven't met yet is just like me? And so he looks over at me and he says, I gotta pee. So he goes and he uses the restroom,
You didn't follow
and
him to continue the
no,
conversation, did
I
you?
didn't follow.
Okay.
No. So I got my stuff. So while he's in the restroom, they deliver my food. I grab it. I'm on my way out,
Uh,
and this guy's coming out of the restroom,
uh-huh.
and his hair's combed over to the side. He's got water driplets on his face, and he reaches out to me with the damp napkin. He says, "Hey, I raise chickens. If you ever need fresh eggs, give me a call."
Mm,
So I take the napkin, I go my way, he goes his way.
mm-hmm.
What happened, right? And so typically when I'm working with audiences and I'm sharing the story, I ask what happens, and I get all sorts of comments and suggestions about what people think that happened. But I had a choice in that situation.
Yeah.
I could have been right and said to this man, "You don't call me a dirty, nasty name, and you don't treat me like that," and all that kind of
Cause
stuff.
a
And
scene, elevate the scene even
I could have
more.
made a
Yeah.
scene
Mm-hmm.
and did all that stuff. And in my estimation, I believe that would have fulfilled one of his fantasies
Mm-hmm.
to
See,
be
I
able
knew it.
to
I knew it.
manu-
Those N
man,
words.
right?
Yeah.
Manipulate my behavior by his words. But I wasn't going to let that happen. And so in that interaction, it may have seemed wrong for me to take that so-called injustice.
Mm-hmm.
But in the bigger scheme of things, I believe that I was right. Because I believe that he may still use that word in private and in his private relationships, but I would imagine that he probably at least thinks about it and is
Yeah.
critical. And so oftentimes we want to be so right. And I see it, on in our community in a number of different ways, in our diversity community in a number of ways, that we want to be so right that we don't want to be effective,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I was just working with on a college campus, working with some young people, and they said, this white, what did she say? This white male racist. She used another term too, but I'll just leave it at that. White male racist said this, that, or the other thing, and we need to help them understand how wrong that is. And I was like, cool, cool. I said, Well, first of all, do you think this person identifies themselves as racist? Right?
Uh-huh.
Do you think that white folks walk around saying, you know what, um, I now have white fragility. I know that my white fragility is in place, or or you know you know guys saying, you know what, my male privilege, it's kicking in right about now.
I'm gonna dial
Guys
it up
saying,
to 80% today.
right, I'm gonna dial up my male privilege to 80%. Right. And I would say no. Right.
Yeah.
But too often we want to label those things
Yeah.
um, in ways that aren't helpful. Now, what I will say is that I think it's important, and I recognize this working in medical institutions, that doctors talk to other doctors in ways that they don't talk to patients.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That needs to happen. We need that level of communication to talk with other practitioners about what is important. However, I think it oftentimes it would be inappropriate for my doctor to use medical terms that I don't understand when we're trying to communicate,
Yep.
right? Or it's irresponsible for my doctor to use those medical terms and then not tell me what they mean
Yep.
in order that I may increase my education. And I think a lot of times, and that's where folks get mixed up, and some folks want to just be mixed up on words like woke,
Yep.
right? Fragility or white supremacy. I believe that those are great tools for practitioners to talk to other practitioners about, but may not be helpful in many of the organizations that we're in because people don't have the background to actually put that in the proper context. And so people are opposed to CRT, and they're not sure if it's critical race theory or if it's cultural responsive teaching, right? They're like, oh, CRT,
Yep.
it's CRT. So,
Well, we'll talk about all those concepts and terms at another time. We'll dive
yep,
deep into those. But your example. Well, my question to you is this: did you ever get eggs?
I never got eggs. I
You never
bought
got
the eggs.
eggs. Oh
I never
no,
got eggs.
not far-fetched eggs.
Right.
But it's okay. Another time, another story. But I think you were sharing your story, I think a part of it is there's I love your concept of being uh, effective versus being right, right? And sometimes, and though we try to be effective in everything that we do, there are times where we won't be effective, right? And there will be times when, even though we've collaborated with each other and we've celebrated the small wins and we've focused on being effective, it's still draining, right? And so I think about, you and I had a conversation about this right when the George Floyd murder happened. And I talked about, I shared with you that it felt like we were taking two steps or one step forward and three steps back, right? And I think you said, or someone had said something about it's okay to take a break, you know? And to me, for DEIB practitioners, it's okay to take a break and breathe and have others step into your space and help you, hold you sometimes up while the work moves forward, right? And it doesn't mean that you are failing in the work, doesn't mean that you are not effective, but it's okay to take a break, take a pause, and because we've heard we've heard other people probably heard this analogy before. This is a marathon, not a sprint, right? And so it's okay to take a break. It's okay to take a breath and catch your breath, regroup yourself, and then keep going. And that's the big important piece here is come back to it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, oftentimes in our practices, we don't spend enough time figuring out ways to heal from
Yes.
these hurts, right?
Yes.
And so I think it's extremely important to be kind and gentle with yourself. I mean, and people have heard this in other contexts, in other ways, but like if you treated other people the way you treat yourself, would you be friends with that person, or would that person be friends with you, right? And so that means, you know, being well rested as
Hmm.
best one can, right? Um, Being well rested, making sure that we're taking care of our physical bodies as much as we are with our minds, right? If I had as many push-ups as I have books, I would be a whole different kind of person, right? So, but that's a challenge that I can set for myself to maintain my physical activity.
Hmm.
Um, and one thing that I do think is really interesting, and I haven't seen a whole lot of folks do this, is mindful meditation that helps to heal the hurts of racism.
Yeah.
And so on our YouTube channel, I just sat down. It was funny. People ask me, Andre, when you make stuff, who is your audience? Well, my audience is me, right? And so I was looking for resources to do mindful meditations around race and racism, and how do I deal with those things? And I didn't find a whole lot. So we started
Mm.
creating
Yeah.
some for our YouTube channel, right? And so there are resources. And people say, well, they're not the best, it doesn't have to be the best. It just has to be. These are starter opportunities for
Yeah.
you to start your own practice of healing the hurts of racism from the inside out. And
Hurt
so that,
people, right? We've
yep.
heard that term used a lot. So if you, as a DEIB practitioner, are hurt in this work, how effective are you going to be in leading DEIB with people outside of you?
For the long term,
Uh huh.
right? I mean, short term, you may be able to just plow through it and be effective and whatnot. But for the long term, there's some opportunities to damage either your personal relationships or your professional relationships if you don't have some coping mechanisms to do that. I know tons of police officers
Mm.
and for emergency responders and folks who are in high stress situations. When they have good practices, they have a lifelong career that is full
Yeah.
of accomplishments. But for those folks who haven't figured that out or struggled with that, it can be a really tough time to be a part of those professions. And I would say that DEI professionals aren't far behind that, because we're constantly being asked to put out organizational fires, or to be thought leaders, or to foresee uh,
The
uh,
future.
yeah, the future throughout the organization, and that really can take a toll. And so you have to have really good, I would go beyond coping skills, but
Hmm.
just be habitual in how you think about your physical and mental and spiritual well-being. So
I'm going to shift a little bit. Early on,
yeah.
and oh, well, before I shift, I think if you haven't jumped on our YouTube channel and looked at those mindfulness, I think those are real important. There's one around being like the mountain, right? And visualizing yourself as a mountain. I think that's important because you have to, it comes back to this whole idea of grounding yourself in your purpose and what you are brought to be to this earth to do in this space. So I think that's
Mhm.
important. Um, and so shifting a little bit, I think part of the other piece, and you brought this up a little bit earlier in the conversation, around sometimes people expect you to know and to have all the answers, right? And I think sometimes it's you got to give yourself some relief and say, nope, I don't know that answer. Let's find out together, right? And so it's okay to not know all the answers. It's okay to not truly be the subject matter expert because you can't be about every single culture, every single topic under the DEIB umbrella. There's no way one practitioner can be, right? But there is this fear, and I saw it myself earlier in my career. This fear um, of what's the term? Fake it till you make it,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
The fear that I'm fake. You know?
That imposter
Yeah, the
syndrome.
imposter syndrome. And people ask, and you're like, oh, I don't know. I gotta say something here, right? But to me, and now that I look back, obviously, early on, there's a lot of that imposter syndrome. A lot of the fear of, oh, what if I don't have the answers? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I did the wrong thing? What if I told the organization to do the wrong thing? What if I told the leader of this organization to do the wrong thing? Right? So now all that fear of doing the wrong thing compounds, and now I got to do something. But I think now that I think back on that, it's okay to not have the answer, and part of it is let's explore it together,
Yep.
right? What makes
Yeah.
sense for you? What makes sense for this organization? What makes sense for the marketing team or HR or comms or business finance team, right? Let's
Yep.
explore this together.
Yep. And I think that exploration, collaborative
Yeah.
exploration, um, feeds the organization, right? So it always frustrates me, or I'm oftentimes frustrated when organizations say, "Well, Andre's the diversity person. Let's just ask him."
Hmm.
Because I'm like, "Well, that's cool. I get it, but like this diversity department belongs to the organization. So this is the organization's diversity partner, right? So it's not my door
Yeah.
because I can't take it with me when I leave.
Yeah.
It's the organization's door, right? And I think, really trying to gently help organizations build that capacity is also something that is great. And and I also think that it helps us to protect our amygdala, right?
Hmm.
So the amygdala is that small part of our brain that, when pushed, gives us the fight and flight and
Yeah.
responses, and emotional, prepares us for whatever we may have to face outside of ourselves, right? And so when we're able to recognize that we can protect that through these healthy relationships, through these meditations,
Hmm.
through fueling ourselves, in those ways, we can constantly be more productive and make better decisions, right?
Yeah.
These relationships that we build and the meditations that we do, they're just not a frou-frou thing. It's just not some luxury, but these actually give us the tools to protect our amygdala, who and people will say, I've been triggered. And what I oftentimes think they mean by that is that someone's just pressed on my amygdala. Somebody's trying to get inside my head and make me respond. And so they're triggering me. And so to reduce those triggers or to reduce those buttons, I think it's important to recognize the need long term to be able to make these adjustments in our
Yeah.
behaviors and in our thought patterns.
So it is already 12:47, my friend.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
what would you leave people with? As you know, again, the session we kicked it off about preventing stress, managing expectations, preventing burnout. What would you leave people with on top of everything we've talked about? We've talked about not doing this work alone. We've talked about celebrating the little wins. We've talked about it's okay to not know all the answers, right? We've talked about using that time to take a breath and take a break, and it's important to your point earlier, turn it off.
Yeah.
It's okay to turn it off. You don't have to have the DEIB hat on all the time. It's okay to turn it off and
Yeah.
recenter yourself in your purpose. Right. So we've talked a lot about those 4 or 5 concepts. Anything else you'd like to offer up to people as they think about how do I prevent burnout in this important work?
Yeah, I would say the only thing that I would, and you said this well, just profound, when you said this, but I would say, making sure that we refill our cup, that
Hmm.
we protect our cup, right? And so again, that evaporation is constantly happening, but it's our responsibility to continually fill that cup and making sure that we help other when we help other people reach their goals. Those little wins are the big wins,
Hmm.
right? And we can remember those things. I think that will help us to stave off this burnout. The other thing is that we didn't talk about, and maybe we'll do another session on this, is this notion of cynicism,
Hmm.
because cynicism uh, can uh, can lead to that burnout too. That things aren't the way I thought they should be, or they're not the
Hmm.
way that they could be better, or whatever, and they're not. And so we have to stave off cynicism as well. And we'll spend more time talking about that in a future session. But we constantly have to be hopeful. People say, "Well, things aren't any better than they were, 100 years ago." Maybe not, but they certainly are different. And
Hmm.
I am grateful for the difference
Hmm.
that has happened over the last 100 years, right?
Hmm.
Or the last 50 years, or the last 20 years. Maybe they're not better, but I do know that they are different, and I will celebrate those differences as those small wins. And so, yeah, those
Yeah.
are the things I would leave folks with.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you on the uh, things may not be better, but they are different sentiment because if you reflect on it, right, even in our 20 years of work doing this work, early on we could never have these type of conversations openly. And I think we talked about this in last session about the whole sensitivity training where it kind of started. We could never have these open conversations about race and racism and discrimination and sexual harassment and things of that nature, where today we do. You know,
And
ERGs would have never existed back then. It never even crossed people's minds.
yeah. And we have listeners. So that's the one
Yeah,
thing, we might have been able to talk about it,
yeah.
but nobody was listening. Nobody was engaging, or it felt that way,
Hmm.
right? And now we see lots of folks engaging in the work, lots of folks looking to build better partnerships, create stronger, more equitable organizations so that everyone benefits. Can you imagine a world where 50% of the population couldn't work, or couldn't have a bank account, or couldn't
Mm.
drive, or couldn't, right? And so I'm glad that our sisters now have the ability to do those things. And quite frankly, I think women, I don't know the statistics, but I was just saying half in terms of male, using the gender binary. But
Yeah,
I think women outnumber men on the planet. So
correct.
that speaks to the importance of this work, and why it's beneficial to pursue.
Yeah,
So,
and those small wins, to your point earlier, those small wins have built up a long track record that has led us to where we are today.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, last couple
So I
minutes here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just can't wait till people join us on in the accelerator. And I think they can. We'll put some links here for the
There's a
accelerator.
QR code right there to
Yep.
your left, Andre, if you can point, yeah, that way. There's a QR code right there where people can go and download our a PDF about what we do and the services we provide. And there is a little bit about the DEIB Accelerate program in there that people can read about. Follow us on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn. We're all over social media, whether it's us individually or the this conversation that you're listening to, the Insights of DIB conversation right here. Go like us, go follow us, go share the work that we do with others as well. And I think those are a couple ways that people can stay connected with us. You can certainly drop us some questions in YouTube as well as the Facebook group, as well as LinkedIn. And there's a group there. So we are, again, truly all over social media. Can be reached via email, and we'll show you the email, share with you the email as we close out here too. But feel free to reach out to us. We are definitely, like we've always talked about, if I can help you create a more inclusive environment where you are, wherever you're sitting. And Andre's sitting in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm sitting in the Kansas City area, right? And so as we create these more inclusive environments, somewhere along the way, maybe in Des Moines, Iowa, we well, our worlds will converge, right?
That's right.
And we will find a larger area that is much more inclusive.
Yeah.
So,
So growing up in summer camps, one of the mottos was that we used to oftentimes close with is that one enkindled spirit can set hundreds on fire.
love
Right.
that. Love
And
that.
so we're really looking to ignite leaders and support leaders in their work. So with that, I think we're out.
Peace. Thank you, Andre.
Grace, thank you
Great
so much.
conversation again, as
Yeah.
usual. And please, again, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, share, like, uh, uh, comment,
All that stuff.
all that
Whatever.
stuff.
Yeah,
And
all
we'll
that stuff.
get back to you. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next week.